Options like staying in bed and reading a book that you could be doing, but thank you for joining us. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Stephanie Bloom. I'm the Director of Caring here, and part of my work here is working on making sure that people are growing and aging well. And part of aging well is being prepared and planning and reducing the stress and the anxiety that might come at the end when all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got a plan for tomorrow, and it might be too late. So we brought this program to you to help you really, settle in and think about some of the things you might want to be thinking about now, and sort of plant seeds and ideas in your mind of, kind of planning for tomorrow and knowing what you might not know. So we hope this program will bring information to you that you might not have even known you didn't know, and hopefully reduce some of the stress around planning and give you some answers. So today's program, we're going to start with Cantor Shockett. Thank you so much, Cantor Shockett, for joining us. And this program, then we're going to follow up with Judy Seif, and then Rabbi Bernstein, and Hannah Moore. So we will begin by looking at preparing, I guess, Mike, what would you say? It's like the personal information piece of planning for tomorrow. So welcome, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us, and we have a wonderful program planned for you. Also, just to let you know, we will be recording this, so if there's something that you do not catch, we will be able to have this as a resource for you to listen to in the future. So thank you again, and thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And Rob Moss is recording in the back room, so thank you, Rob. And so therefore, I'm going to stay back here so I can use the microphone. And if you have questions, just be loud, because this microphone here will pick up kind of the whole room. You don't have to come up, but if people end up needing a microphone, we'll pass one around. Just trying to save some time of sending a microphone around. First of all, happy Hanukkah. Good to see you all. This is not part of the job of being a cantor, I will tell you. It is from life experiences that I asked Stephanie if I could be a part of sharing these things with you. And then I think, Jan, you and I talked about this at a Wise Aging meeting years ago. Maybe that was even before COVID. And just talking about different documents. What I found when my parents, who were then probably in their 70s or early 80s, we moved them from Florida to here because they needed more care. And my dad had dementia and started to have dementia maybe about 15 years ago. And at that time, prior to my dad's dementia, he was the one who did all of the finances, kept all of the records, did everything for him and my mom. And my mom, when he started not being able to do that anymore, my mom took a crash course in how to do that, and I helped her through that. And one of the things we discovered in all the files was this amazing document that my dad had prepared with all emergency information, all kinds of things that we would have had to do a lot of research to find. And that ended up being very helpful through the years. Ultimately, when my mom died in 2019, when I then needed to answer a lot of questions, and I was the estate executor of the estate, and there was a trust set up, and I was the trustee, and all these things that I had no idea about that I had to jump into and learn. So I'm bringing you that wisdom. It's life experiences. I am not an estate attorney. I am not an expert, so I'm sharing these things just from me to you all, and hopefully that will be helpful to you. However, if you have a complicated estate or financial situation, I do recommend talking to an estate attorney. We've done that too. Actually on Friday, my brother and sister and I had a meeting with our estate attorney to talk about my dad's estate. So those people are really helpful. They really understand the law and the taxes involved and all that. So I do recommend you do that. So I'm going to really talk about what you could do right now in good health to make it easier for either you or your spouse or children in dealing with issues that present itself when you can't do it anymore. And so there are two handouts that you need for my thing. Well, first is the yellow packet. And I only made 40, but we probably have enough for everybody. But originally I was thinking one per couple. But if anybody didn't get one and they want it, there's more in the back. And then everyone needs the 5 wishes document, which every person should have. And we also have, we keep them here at Temple, and you can also get them online. So are they still, yeah, Stephanie? Were there still any on the copy machine, Stephanie? Okay, I think there might be more coming then. So my little time here with you before Judy takes over is to talk about these 4 things: creating an emergency document, the legal documents generally that you should be aware of having, and if you don't, you might want to talk to an attorney about getting those. Advance directives, which is what the 5 wishes is, and then DNR forms, do not resuscitate forms. So we'll start with creating an emergency document. So I just created this document here. The first pages 1 to 4 is the emergency document. There's probably, you could find emergency documents online, I'm sure, and they'll be, some of them will be similar, some might be easier to fill out. This is not by any means an expert document. I just was thinking about the things that helped me when I had to answer all these questions. And so I just tried to make it easier for you to fill in things that you need about yourself, or jointly you and your spouse, if that applies. So the first part is personal information. It seems like a no-brainer to write down your date of birth, social security number, all those things. But let me tell you, if your kids open up that drawer, your file drawer, and you have a folder that's labeled emergency document, and you give them this, let me tell you, there's a sigh of relief. Because they don't have to go searching. Yes, they're going to know your birth date, but are they going to know your social security number? Are they going to know, your passport numbers, your Medicare numbers, and all those things? So write those down, file this in an emergency document folder, make it easier for each other. And there might be things that are missing. So some of you may have other things that apply. I know for my parents, they had supplemental Medicare through a company. They had the prescription plan through, I think it was AARP, right? They had, and each of those things have numbers, and it's important to know that. Also, I would say, which I didn't put on here, but a lot of those, have websites where you log in with an account, and so I would put that information on there too. Once you notify, for example, though, in a financial situation, once you notify a bank that someone has died, they're going to shut off that access to that website, that personal access. So we'll talk about the financial stuff in a minute. But the first section here really are things that are personal information: numbers, dates, birth dates, all those things, membership, passwords and website login information, things like that. The second part are locations of where you keep the emergency documents, right? Where is your birth certificate? Is it in a safety deposit box? Is it at home? And write that down, your marriage certificate, divorce documents, ketubah. If you have a ketubah, where do you keep it? Is it on the wall or is it filed somewhere? And that could be helpful because when there is a death and there is a funeral and we say, well, what was your mom's Hebrew name? And I'd say 70% of the times they don't know, and they have to go searching for whatever document it might be on. Generally, ketubah is where I would go first. Military discharge papers, right? If you want to have, and Judy will talk more about this, but if you want to have military honors at a funeral, then that's going to be important to know where those discharge papers are. Same with, there may be a financial benefit to you if you were in the military. And that was challenging. My dad was in the public health service, which some people consider part of the military, especially during wartime, and others don't. And so, even though there's a uniform and he could have gotten into Vincent Hall, right, which is only for military, but they include public health service. When it comes to death, death information or military honors, it's not included. So you don't know that, until you do that research. Also, where do you keep your will, if you have trust documents, who's your health care surrogate, power of attorney, the HIPAA documents, all those things that a lawyer might prepare for you. If the lawyer is keeping it and you don't have a copy, then your kids are going to need to know how to get that. Once the lawyers prepared everything, we scanned all that stuff in, and then it was accessible on a cloud server to myself, my brother, and my sister. So we all had access to those important documents, and there were times where someone said, well, who is the power of attorney? Can you send me that document? And we could easily just send that document off by an email. So I do recommend all that. Living will is an ethical, living will we're going to talk about with the 5 wishes, but the ethical will Hannah Moore is going to talk about. And then previous tax returns are important too. So what do they say, 7 years? 7 years to hold them. So that's important. Then funeral information, and Judy's going to get into those logistics, but what it would be good to write down on this document are your Hebrew names. If you have selected a funeral home that you want, or you pre-planned it, all that stuff should be written down along with all the documents that they give you should be in that same folder. Some of you might have purchased plots previously and have the documents from the cemetery, or maybe you don't have that yet, but you want to be buried at King David. I would write that down because your kids are the ones who are going to say, well, where should my parents be buried, or should they be cremated, right? And so your wishes are going to be important to write down for them. Okay. Financial information, I think I kind of covered that in the personal information as well. But here are some of the other things for financial information to make sure you write down. I guess, is it on the back side? Oh, yeah, here it is. On the second side, page 2. Page 2, this is where I made a place for you to write down all of your bank, investment information, locations, the account numbers, who are the beneficiaries, right? And if it's a trust versus individual beneficiaries, with an IRA, my experience has been that it was easier to go to the financial institution that holds the IRAs and put the beneficiaries in directly with them, as opposed to other things where everything goes to a trust, and then you have trust documents that specify where things get split up and how they get split up. But if that, for example, your IRA needs to go to your kids, and it's going to be split into equal parts, then the easiest thing to do, in my opinion, not a legal opinion, in my opinion, is to make sure you fill out the beneficiary forms with that company. So, for example, in our case, my mom and dad had their IRAs in Vanguard, and pretty easy, company to deal with. We had given them the beneficiary information. It's pretty easy. It was just split 3 ways to myself, my brother, and my sister. And when my mom died, I simply called Vanguard. I had to provide the death certificate, and it was split up into 3 what's called inheritance IRAs, which is a little bit different than the IRA stays in the name. So it's like, Sandra Shockett Inheritance IRA, and then it was for me. And then when you get an inheritance IRA, if you become the owner of an inheritance IRA, now you have a certain number of years you have to take those disbursements, but every year you take a required minimum distribution on that. You could also, I think it used to be able to be passed down to other generations. I'm not sure if it is anymore. No. Some people are shaking their head no, because the rules changed not too long ago. So an IRA is kind of on one pedestal of, if you will, of all the different financial pieces. So write down, who are the beneficiaries of the IRA. What bank accounts, for example, have co-owners, and especially if your child is a co-owner or your spouse is a co-owner, that's really important because, for example, if, as the executor and the power of attorney for my dad, we had a bank account that was in my dad's name and my name so that I could write checks. So when he died, his name was taken off immediately, but the account didn't have to be closed because my name's on it. So I was able to pay the expenses of the funeral, pay the expenses of all those things, still from those funds that were funds that he had, but because I was a co-owner of that account, I was able to do that. So that was important. If I wasn't, and it was just in my mom and dad's name, for example, those accounts would have been closed, and we would have had to go through a process in order to get those funds. What other bills or obligations are there? Write those things down that you have, as well as insurance policies and the names of the people who can help you with that insurance, whether it's insurance agent or a company, those kinds of things. Vehicles, right? Whose names are the vehicles in? And when it comes to property tax and registration and all those things, that's important. Luckily for us, my parents stopped driving before they got too sick, and so we were able to either sell their car or end their registration or those kinds of things, so it wasn't an issue. But as you know, there are people that that pass away, suddenly, and you have to think about those things. So it gets very complicated, as you can see. And by organizing it on a piece of paper like this might make it easier for you or for someone else to deal with this. And then things like your accountant's name, phone number, if you have a financial advisor, all those things. The safe deposit box. Are your kids on there also, and do they know where you keep the key? So those are important. Okay. On page, I think I did all the personal ID information. Okay. And I did important documents. I think I've talked about all these things already. Sorry, I wasn't really holding the slides up with myself. Okay. Let me just look on the document on page 3. Again, this section is about funeral information. Judy's going to go over all your choices and things like that. But once you know what you're doing, then this is where I recommend you write them down so that people, that's one of the biggest questions that we as the clergy get all the time from, say, surviving family members who might say, I'm not sure I knew what my dad or mom wanted. And I really want to follow their wishes, but I didn't know their wishes, so I'm going to guess. So this way you make it easier for them, right? Of course, we also say to people, it's really about the mourners. So, what do you want to do? For example, and Judy, you'll talk more about this, but if the whole family is living, in New Jersey, do you want to bury your parent in Virginia? Right? Those are the kind of questions that you have. And sometimes, it was easier for me because my parents had gotten their plots years and years and years ago. I think when their parents got their plots, my parents got plots too. And they were in an Orthodox Jewish cemetery in Baltimore. And so the whole family there is together, and it was just an easy decision for us. And my dad had kept the deed, and I had it in that document, so it was just really, really simple to deal with. Yes, talk really loud just so that we can get it.
How about writing a blurb for your obituary?
That's a really great idea because, I had to do it for my mom and dad, and then I sent it to my brother and sister to look at, and then we all edited it and sent it in. But this has to happen very quickly, very quickly. So yeah, if you're up for it, and you want to write what's the most important thing in your life. I mean, we guys just followed kind of a formula, which the funeral home will give you also. But if there were things that were really important to you, definitely write that down and put that in there. Which I'm going to, on the screen, I'm going to jump really to that for a second because in addition to Hebrew name and what you might want in your obituary, if there was a prayer that was really important to you, because we always, when we sit down with the family, we say, was there anything that you want in the service that from our tradition, whether it's a prayer, a poem, a song, and they say, what would my mother have liked? And so if there is something that's important to you, write it down. And with instructions, I want this said at my funeral. I know my mom and dad were very connected to that prayer or poem in the prayer book called We Remember Them. It's a litany of different times that we remember people in the season of life, and it ends with, each line ends with, we will remember them. And so that was so important. So I knew that had to be done because that's what my parents wanted. And actually, we ended up writing that line, we will remember them, on the cemetery headstone because that was important to my parents. So if there's something like that's important to you, if you want to write down, they were friends with Cantor Michael Shockett. And some of you, we get this question a lot about, because we ask, well, do you want to have Shiva? In non-Orthodox Judaism, it's really up to you. If we were an Orthodox congregation, we would say you're obligated to have, Shiva 7 days, cover the mirrors, the low chairs, have services, twice a day in the morning and at night. I don't think in the 26 years I've been here, I don't think I've ever been to a home of a family member that did the Orthodox, the traditional way. Generally, I find, now I'm not saying you can't do that. If you want to do that, if that's important to you, great. We're here for you. But generally, I find that most people want 1 or 2 days of Shiva services, which means they want a public opportunity for people to come and sit with them, and we would say Kaddish together in a public way. That means that they still might have a private Shiva for 7 days, just not invite people over or have a service. But if that's important to you, right, then write it down and let your kids or the dependents know what you want, because it will make their job easier. They're not trying to guess. Okay. So legal documents. On page 3, the legal documents, what my parents had, they had a will, they had a trust, which I think was called a revocable trust. Are there any lawyers here? Am I right? Revocable trust is the normal one, right? Because there's irrevocable and revocable.
So it's revocable until they die, and then it's irrevocable.
Got it. And I still don't understand that, but thank you. Okay, that's great. So that's why I'm a cantor, not a lawyer. But I will tell you what happened for us is that, again, my parents each had an IRA, and they each had their savings, right, which was invested in different things. And what happened when my mom died is we had already changed the documents because we knew my dad had dementia and was not going to be the one who had then power over making decisions over all that. That was impossible. So it became my mom and me as the people that were in charge of the financial stuff. And as you can see, that's scary hearing from me, right, that I don't really know what I'm doing. But it's okay. We made it through. But basically, all of my mom's assets, not anything that was a financial asset, went into this trust. And the trust then, the directions of the trust documents were that this trust was to be split up into 3 equal parts at some point after she dies. So my brother and sister and I, after she died, we decided not to split it up because we wanted to save that money to use for my dad's care should his IRA run out. Well, it turns out his IRA didn't run out, so we didn't have to do that. But we were getting close. And then we found out that, well, really, that's not a great way to do it because it's in our name, and please, attorneys here, help me if I'm right about this, but when we take money out of that trust, even if it's for my dad's care, we are taxed ourselves personally for that. So better to use up his IRA and then deal with other funding opportunities, Medicaid or whatever it was that would have to be done. But we didn't have to go down that path. But now we're at a situation, my dad just died, that now we have this trust, my dad's IRA, so that my dad's IRA is going to be split into the 3 inherited IRAs, and then there's a trust that then needs to get split. And the question that I had for the attorney was, well, how do we still have expenses for my dad? How do we pay for those ultimately out of his funds? And really the answer is, well, you can a little bit, but that once that IRA becomes, once he dies and the bank knows he's died, you can't just take money out of that IRA for him anymore. It really has to be split into those 3 inherited IRAs. So ultimately, the expenses of any expenses that are left, we're just splitting 3 ways into the funds that we're getting, which is it's just a little bit more complicated as opposed to just taking money from his account and paying it. Can't do that, but ultimately, there's an inheritance, and that's going to cover those expenses. So that was helpful to us. But now once we split up that trust, then the trust is going to be dissolved. So that won't be there anymore because the trust has to file tax returns every year, and there's tax to pay on earnings that are capital gains taxes, taxes and dividend and interest taxes and all that stuff. So I'm actually, going to be happy I don't have to file those taxes after 2024 again, which will be good. Durable power of attorney. Oh, well, HIPAA authorization is part of the documents that a lawyer will have you fill out, which allows the healthcare professionals to release information, to family members. So it's important if you want to make sure that you're on those HIPAA authorizations so that the hospitals or medical professionals can tell you information about the person that is sick. Durable power of attorney is someone who is there to make decisions for you while you are alive, but are unable to make those decisions. So once someone dies, that power of attorney is no longer valid, and then it goes into the estate document. So whoever then becomes the estate representative or the personal representative is the one who then can make those decisions. But you need to have that durable power of attorney document and ready to be sent to various places. That's really important. I will tell you just, again, another quick story. When my mom, right before she died, she had gone to the hospital. We had already had a DNR in place, all that, legally signed, everything. But, when you go to a hospital, if they're coming for the first time, there's a little bit of bureaucracy trying to get documents that they might have, but they don't, they don't know if they have it, and it takes time. So my brother was on the phone to the hospital, the doctor and the charge nurse, that he had a DNR, she had a DNR in place, that kind of thing. And they were going to work on getting those documents from the hospital files. But I didn't have a copy of the DNR at my fingertips, but I did have the durable power of attorney on my phone that I could access. When I got to the hospital, I showed them that, I'm the power of attorney, blah, blah, blah. I walked in my mom's room, and they were getting ready to start CPR because she had just, flatlined. And as soon as, and it was just coincidental that I happened to walk into the room at that time. And I said, wait, stop, I'm her son, I'm the power of attorney, she has a DNR. And they were able to stop. Thank God, because it would have been horrific if they would have tried to crack her ribs and all that stuff. So all those documents are really important to know about and to have access to when you can. Healthcare advocate is different than the durable power of attorney. So the healthcare advocate, there should be a separate document that your estate attorney should provide that tells who is the person who's going to make the medical decisions. It could be the same person, but it's a different document. So in my case, my brother was the healthcare power of attorney, and I was the durable power of attorney. And so I dealt with all the financial stuff, and he dealt with all the medical stuff. He's a doctor. That was the right decision. It was great. Worked out. But you just need to know that. And then
The medical power of attorney, how were you able to stop after the CPR?
The medical power of attorney is more of the person who is dealing with the doctors on care and treatment and things like that, right? And can kind of put their foot down on things. So he was on the phone at the same time. So it all kind of worked out. We were both there, and he was the healthcare power of attorney, and I was the durable power of attorney. But I think it actually was more important that I said, I'm her son, actually, than anything else. And the fact that I said that she has a DNR on file. Yeah, they didn't question me.
A medical power of attorney is not as legal as the durable power of attorney.
There we go. So the durable power of attorney is the one that's recognized by legal entities,
Right.
correct? Yeah,
So when the fire department came to the gym.
yeah.
I found out that there's a form of Fairfax County called the File of Life. That you can go to the fire department, pick up and fill it out, and they give you a thing to carry with you should something happen. You just hand it, because it gets done some really basic medical information and all that. I never knew about that.
So what she said is Fairfax County Fire Department, Fire and Rescue Department, if you live in Fairfax County, they have a document, what's it called? File of Life. File of Life. And you can request, I would guess they have it online.
They do, but you
Yeah.
can also go in and they'll give you like a packet.
Okay, so I would imagine if you go to any fire station
Or you can do it online.
or online to get that document, that way they'll keep it on file. You also, I recommend, and a lot of people do this, you put your DNRs on your refrigerator. EMTs, paramedics, they know to look at those places for that kind of thing. I don't know about Arlington Fire, but I'm guessing they probably have something similar, right? Just to make it easier if you need it. Also, the 5 wishes thing, and I have a document in here which is a DNR. Just you don't want to put that in the safe deposit box. That needs to be visible and out there. Okay. All right, so let me just kind of go through this a little bit. Let's look at the 5 wishes document. So the 5 wishes document is a living will. It's really, really easy. And I did this with my mom, and we found it very helpful because we were able to talk through some of these things that she did not want to talk through, right? It was really helpful. So it deals with your values, and it has a worksheet to help you there. There also is a dementia provision if you have someone that has dementia that's specific to dementia that I have separately in the yellow packet for you. And even though this is recognized by most states as a legal document, there is a separate DNR form that I put in the yellow document that I would advise having that too. Okay, so 5 wishes, helping you and your family plan for and receive the care you want and deserve. 25% of Americans die at home, so only a quarter of people die at home, yet more than 70% say they want to die at home. So dying is often unnecessarily painful and isolating. Only 20 to 30% of the population, has completed an advance directive. So this 5 wishes is your advance directive, and I do recommend it. Some doctors are not aware of their patients' wishes. And so it's important when you make this document that you also let your doctor know and give them a copy of it too. In 2007, only 25% of physicians knew that their patients had an advance directive on file. Yes?
I would say most of us have multiple physicians for different specialties.
Right.
Would we give them all?
Well, I would give, your primary care doc is probably the one who needs it, whether there's someone else who is dealing with a lot of your medical issues, can't hurt, right? But the primary care doctor, I think, is the most important. Now, you remember that it used to be like when my dad, who was a doctor, like he went to the hospital to do rounds. Doctors don't do that as much anymore, if they do it at all. So there's, the hospital really needs to have a copy of these directives too. Yes?
Because I've had different procedures at different hospitals, both the Virginia Hospital Center and Inova have my medical directive scanned into their database.
Great.
So you can do that through your physician.
Right. So if your primary care physician is connected to, a larger network, then find out, can they get this to the right people so that it's there, it's on file. Yeah. The end of life is often treated only as a medical moment, not as a value-based moment, right? So it's simple, everyday language. You don't need an attorney. Promotes peace of mind, helping your family avoid guessing and guilt. So it's the first living will to address personal, emotional, and spiritual needs, along with medical wishes, created by the American Bar Association, and distributed all widely. Okay, I'm just going to skip to. It also it meets legal requirements in 42 states plus DC. So all of the states, all of our area is part of that. It addresses what person you want to make healthcare decisions for you. Obviously, your healthcare power of attorney and this should be aligned, right? You don't want to have someone who's different on the healthcare power of attorney than on this, because then you have competing interests. So it should all be aligned. The kind of medical treatment you want or don't want is listed there. How comfortable you want to be, how you want people to treat you, and what you want your loved ones to know. So if you look at the document, if we open the document, pages 2 and 3 are introductory things, but page 4 is wish number 1. So remember, there are 5 wishes. Page number 1, wish number 1 are legal documents, and then the 3, 4, and 5 are more about comfort, spirituality, forgiveness, final wishes. So wish number 1, the person you want to make healthcare decisions for you when you can't. This allows you to name a person to act on your behalf. Again, your healthcare agent should be the same as in your other legal documents. But you simply, go through the packet. You write this stuff down. It gives you more information about what that person does. And then if you look on page 5, let me just see if you look on page 5, it says, it gives you 2 columns of bullet-pointed things that you want this person to make decisions about. But it says cross out anything you don't want them to make a decision about, right? So it just makes it very easy. If you don't want them to do it, cross it out. And then list anything in those lines where you want them to do that's not listed. And at the bottom, if you change your mind, you will then destroy these documents, things like that. So that's wish number 1. Wish number 2 is my wish for the kind of medical treatment I want or don't want, right? I don't want to be in pain, for example. I want to be comfortable. Wish 3 goes into, we'll get to wish 3, sorry. You want to be offered food and fluids if it's safe for you to eat and drink. You want to be kept clean and warm. These are the things that that are listed on wish 2 at the top. Also, everyone might have a different opinion of what life support is. And so if you have an idea of what you want or don't want, this is an opportunity to write that down. It does talk about the DNR form at the bottom, and that's a separate form. And then on page 7 in wish number 2, again, you can check off the things that are important to you. They give you a list of choices. You want to have life support. You don't want to have life support. If my doctor believes it, but my family doesn't, things like that, you can really say. And then specific, if you're in a coma, if you have brain damage. Oh, it's all kind of fun stuff in here. What a wonderful thing. Okay, wish number 3. Oh, also just reiterating, because I might have confused you. So this is not a DNR, right? So just knowing that you need a separate DNR, but it does have your wishes about whether you should be resuscitated. So you need a separate official legal DNR, which I'll show you. This is the DNR. It's on page, where is it? Here it is, pages 6, 7, and 8 is a DNR. Your physician has to sign it, you sign it, and you give copies to the physician, to the hospital, you keep a copy on your refrigerator, that kind of thing. Give it to your kids, anybody else that be making decisions.
Mike, what's the requirement in Virginia? Does it have to be signed by your doctor?
Yeah, this is the Virginia Department of Health document. So this one has the physician's name, so they have to sign that. Wish 3, on page 8 of the 5 wishes. This is about how you want your pain managed, right? The comfort care you want. And you, again, you just see all these bulleted points. Anything you don't believe in, cross out. Makes it very easy. And this you see on the screen, like for example, the example, I wish to have my favorite music played when possible until my time of death. Cross it out. They don't want music. Don't want music. So, you know, and not all, these things may not actually happen. Like for example, my dad, who loved music, I was there with a CD to play for him in his last, you know, day. We didn't know it was going to be his last day, but his last day, I came that morning with a CD to play for him and to sing to him and this and that. There was so much commotion in the room that he wouldn't have even heard that music. So we tried, but it, you know, the intent was there. That was the hope. Okay. So wish number 3 is the comfort. And then wish number 4 is how you want people to treat you. That starts at the bottom of page 8. And again, you just cross out the things you don't agree with. It's what other people should keep in mind if you become seriously ill, what you want, whether you want to have people around you or hold your hand or sing to you or whatever, prayers, ideas for your surroundings, such as pictures of your loved ones around you, those kinds of things. That's wish number 4. And you just cross out what you don't agree with. And then wish number 5, my wish for what I want my loved ones to know. So this is values, right? This is also some things that you might overlap with an ethical will that Hannah's going to talk about. But look at these things. They encourage you to express matters of deep importance in an age where families often live apart. Allows you to offer love and forgiveness to those who have hurt you. One of the things, you know, in Jewish tradition is that right before the moment of death would be an opportunity to say the vidui, the confessional prayer, about asking for forgiveness to God for all of the things that you might think that you have done wrong for. And that can be said on your behalf if you're not able to say it. So many times I've been in a hospital room or a hospice room where I've said that on behalf of the particular person. Communicates practical matters such as preferences for memorial or burial. That's all in wish number 5. Cross out what you don't want. And then at the end, on page 10, you sign it, you have somebody witness it, you have somebody notarize it. We have a notary here at Temple. You can always bring it here to have it notarized. And then on page 11, it basically says what you're supposed to do. So make copies of your completed form and give it to family, friends, healthcare agent, doctor, right? This allows you an easy way to discuss your wishes. If you don't feel comfortable talking about that, then just give them the document and say, read this. Keep it available. Don't put it in your safety deposit box. And they even give you a wallet card that you can have. So I think this is a great document. Makes it so easy. And for those people who don't want to talk about that stuff, write it down and then share it that way. Did I get to everything? How do you change 5 wishes? If you want to use 5 wishes instead of a living will or durable power of attorney for health care, great. You fill it out. As it said, you destroy copies of the old living will. You don't have one saying one thing and one saying another. If you don't like what this says anymore, you can destroy that. But then let the people know that you've done that. Your lawyer, your healthcare surrogate, your family, your doctor, those kinds of people. Oh, and then the dementia provision, which is the last, page 9, again, easy to fill out. You just go through, and fill out what, what it says. For example, I have forgotten everything about my past, but still recognize close to me. That's the marker. The care preference is you want to live as long as possible. You want no life-saving treatments. Keep me comfortable. So these are the types of things that you want to do with someone who might be in early stages of dementia, and start to think about what their future might be like, and that might be helpful. Okay, yeah, questions? Yes.
So I see the healthcare agent in the 5 wishes. I don't see a
Right, durable power of attorney is a legal document separate from 5 wishes. You should do both, absolutely. And I don't know, for the lawyers here, I imagine it needs to be done by an attorney, but can you do a durable power of attorney online? Or better to go to an attorney, to a state attorney and get it done? Probably. Yes.
Okay, I have 2 points.
Hang on, before you ask your question, let's just say the answer then is go to an attorney. Okay, go ahead.
Number 1, don't leave your original will in a safe deposit box. All right, leave it in the fireproof box or on file with your attorney, because if you leave it in a safe deposit box, it may take your heir a long time before they can get it. So
Exactly.
don't put your original will in a safe deposit. Number 2, one thing I would add to your yellow sheet
Yes.
is that the executor or heir
Yeah,
should take, as soon as they can, take the death certificate and the original will to the local probate court where the deceased died. And in Virginia, it's usually the circuit court and there's a probate court. And even if you're fortunate that you don't have to go through a probate because things are in a trust or you have beneficiaries name, you still should register the will and death certificate with the probate court, and they'll give you what they call a letter of qualification. And so you can take that as the executor and do what you need to do. So that's the plan.
and I will just say, yes, thank you for that. I would just say that in my case, both when my mom died and now that my dad died, our state attorney said that what they had was so little and simple that it does not need to go to probate. So it depends on the case, but I guess it can't hurt to file that stuff because you don't know. You know, if you get a very complicated estate, then yes, you're going to have to do probate. Yes.
Two things. One is also sometimes if your brother dies, if you have an attorney that has the will, etc., they will file for you.
That's right.
It's great. The other thing is, as an alternative to the yellow sheet, which is great, there's this wonderful book called I'm Dead, Now What?
Mm.
And it's sold on Amazon and the Singles catalog and everything, and it's really, really great. It goes through all of this, wonderful places to write it down. It's in a sort of spiral notebook form, so it's substantial. They have things, even related to pets. What do you do with whoever's pet them?
Right.
So that's an alternative.
I have an extra copy, first one is this.
Yes.
So in Fairfax County, you can register or file or whatever your will with Fairfax County as soon as you've written and signed. You don't have to go to we wrote our wills in 2019.
Right.
They were filed with the circuit court.
Can you repeat this?
So what she said is that you can file your will in Fairfax County, and I'm guessing in Arlington County too, because it's a state court system, right? You can file your will as soon as it's written. You don't have to wait to any particular time, but as soon as, and so that's what they did. Their wills, your documents, right, were filed with the court. Just the will. Is it circuit court or district court? Circuit court.
In Fairfax, and then, you pay $5 or something like that. But if it's a long time until you die, let's say, then you don't have to worry that you got lost or anything like that. But I have another question.
Okay.
I expect you're not going to answer this because this, I think, is a legal question. Maybe somebody does know. But when I look at the dementia document,
Yes.
it looks really useful to me. I've never seen such a thing. But it seems to me like that could conflict with what you say in your written will, right? Like if you say, if Mark is, I remember that my husband still recognizes this closest to me, and you choose, I want to live as long as possible. What happens if you don't try to rest? You said you wanted to live as long as possible. Right?
Well, it's-
So what trumps what?
Right, remember that this is not an official DNR, right? It's so other than having a DNR in hand to someone, there's going to be life-saving measures done to you, right? That's the way it is around everywhere, right? It just, only if you give them an official DNR would they stop those life-saving measures. So that's why it's important to if a DNR, if you don't want someone's life to be prolonged, if they have, a heart attack or they need to go on a feeding tube, or whatever it is, whatever the medical case is, that DNR trumps everything. So even if it's written in here on the dementia thing, this is really more about the person's values and when they wrote it at that time, when they were able to make those decisions, it's their values and what they want. And your job then is to hopefully uphold those values and make sure that their wishes are being kept. But it's not a legal document. I hope that answered the question. Sort of.
It does answer the question. This
Okay.
can be added to an advanced directive. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I guess so.
If you sign this after you sign the advanced directive, for example, would they consider that this is a more accurate statement?
I don't think so, because this is really for you and your family, not a legal document. Yes?
If you don't die in a hospital, how do you get a death certificate?
The funeral home, and Judy, maybe you can talk about more about that, but the funeral home is responsible for getting the death certificate. At least in my situation, if you don't use a funeral home, I'm really not sure how that death certificate happens, but it's through the state medical examiner's office, probably.
Also,
Generally, someone comes out, if you, the fire and rescue people will come out and report it.
Mhm.
And they put into place the opportunity to get the death certificate.
So what Judy says, the fire and rescue people have a method of getting that death certificate in place. But someone has to, in my other role as chaplain, for the police department, I do go to a lot of scenes where somebody died unexpectedly. And if somebody dies in the home and there's not a doctor to sign that death certificate, not physically sign it, but say on the phone to the EMTs or the police that, yes, I am going to sign this death certificate, then that death becomes a medical examiner's case, and the medical examiner's office has to sign the death certificate. That's really important, because a body cannot be released to a funeral home unless a death certificate is going to be signed. But you want to add to that, Rabbi Bernstein?
Yeah, I just was going to say, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. This is incredible, and it's a loving, important thing for us to do for our families. But I wanted to add, and maybe Ken or Shaka, you can speak to this about if somebody is in hospice care. I think that hospice will facilitate the death certificate.
That is
not such an issue.
Right. So my dad was in hospice. They are the signer. The doctor of hospice was the signer of the death certificate, even though the doctor wasn't there. But the nurse that was there makes that happen. And then the funeral home takes that information, which is now has been signed, and they actually produce the death certificate or make the death certificate happen for you. So the certificates themselves come through the funeral home, but the signer of the death certificate is the medical person that authorized it.
And the wonderful thing about hospice is because they've been caring for your loved one, they are very tuned into this. This is exactly what happened with my mother. She died at home, but she was under hospice care. So it was so smooth.
So I'm going to turn it over to Judy because I'm gone way too long, and I apologize. So anyway, again, not legal advice, just experiences. Thank you. So do you want to?
I'm going to use the little.
Okay.
I'll do.
If
Yeah,
she needs
yeah.
help,
I just.
as
yeah.
long as the red lights are on, this should work.
I'm not
most
always
of
so
the way.
good with the technical aspects. I'm old.
I'll come and get this later.
First of all, good morning. As I looked at the people who are coming in here today, I have known you for decades. And did I ever believe when I was the nursery school director that I'd be selling cemetery plots for the temple? No. But like Cantor Shochet, I come to this not just from my past professional experience as temple administrator, because that's when we started, or I started this program that I'll tell you about, but because of a lot of personal experience. I was the executor for 3 of my family's estates, so I learned a lot while I was, trying to absorb what it was that I was doing in each case. I share information with you on some practical aspects of funeral planning. Some may be a little bit duplicative of what Cantor Shochet said, but I have some different stories that will perhaps be, from a lay perspective, very helpful. I do this all now as a volunteer. When I retired from my position as temple administrator, one of the things I said to Beth Silver, who took over, is you've got so much to do. This is something I started, and I'll continue it. Did I think it would be lasting 20 years after I retired? No. But it is a really important and special part of my life that I can help my friends, my colleagues, my TRS congregants with some practical information at points of their life when they've got a lot on their minds. So what are we going to talk about in the next few moments? Let's see if I can get this going. Yes. We're going to talk very briefly about the importance of pre-planning, and obviously because you're here today, you believe in that. I'm going to mention some thoughts and facts about burial versus cremation. We're going to talk about the 3 legs of planning a funeral: the cemetery, the funeral home, and the role of TRS, some of which Cantor Shochet covered in terms of what the clergy does, but there's more. And a few additional tidbits and practical information. Let's talk first about pre-planning. This is a gift to yourself and for those you leave behind. That sounds like a sort of kitschy a thing that a funeral home would use in an advertising brochure, but it's very true. So many of the congregants who call to explore purchasing cemetery sites and making further arrangements do it because they say, my parents did it for me, and I want to do this as a gift for my kids so they will not have to worry about it. Conversely, I have a lot of people who call and say to me, when my loved ones died, there was nothing planned and it was a nightmare. I want to spare my family. So being proactive is important. But it does some stuff for you too. It ensures that your wishes regarding the service and your final resting place are known. Here's a story. About 5 or 7 years ago, I got a phone call from some folks who recognized my name because my husband was raised with them in Alexandria in the old days. Their parents had both died quite a long time ago, and they buried them. And only when they were finally cleaning everything out did they discover that their parents had 2 cremation niches at King David, which they in turn donated to us, and that their parents had planned to be cremated, but nobody ever talked about it. And so they said, we went ahead and buried them, and now we have these, can we donate them to you? So leaving the directions and instructions that Cantor Shochet talked about and that I'm going to talk about at least ensures that your wishes are known. It also contributes to a sense of completing an important responsibility. I cannot tell you how many people say to me when they've gone through this process, which is time-consuming and expensive, that they feel like it's a job well done. They feel a kind of sense of relief. One of them said it's kind of like buying underwear. It's not exactly what I wanted to do and how I wanted to spend my money, but I knew I needed to do it. So you can approach it with a little bit of humor when you're well and when you're doing this as an exercise rather than a tragic event happening and no plans being made. Clearly, it leaves less stress for those you leave behind. It saves time for your loved ones in a way that you really can't put a mark on. Wouldn't you rather have your kids spend time with you or with the spouse that will remain than having to go out on a day like this searching for a cemetery site because nobody had done anything? So it saves them time at an important point of life. And finally, it can save you money because it gives you time to make decisions, to take advantage of things like the cemetery program we have at Rodeo Shalom, to discover which of the funeral homes has the kind of package that works best for you and might be less expensive. So money may not be the big objective, but if you could save $3 or $4 or many more $1,000, that's important too. Let's say a few words about burial versus cremation. 20 years ago, when I first started working with families and cemetery sites, nobody talked about cremation. It was still probably too close to World War II, to all of the memories that we had growing up, our parents' point of view, And it just wasn't an issue. This couple that had planned that so many years ago was very unusual for them to do it, and so their kids never even thought of it. Though a majority, and a large majority, of Jews still choose traditional in-ground burial, cremation is gaining in popularity. Nowadays, issues of ecology, of the use of space, financial concerns, because cremation is a less expensive way to go than in-ground burial, they're all coming up. And one thing you should know from the Reform point of view is that cremation is okay. Yes?
The new maybe fad is compostable.
Correct.
Does King David?
We have not had, King David does not do that. We haven't heard about a lot of that in this congregation. And in fact, Michael, have you had many people do the newest form of natural burial?
No.
Okay. We're not there yet. Okay, but the point is that times change. In this slide, you see a little bit of a difference in thought about burial versus cremation. On the left-hand side, you see a traditional casket, all wood, very Jewishly correct, and a fairly typical-looking cemetery. On the other side, you see a small box, wooden box, that holds cremains. And for most Jewish people, it would be a wooden box because a metal urn would not disintegrate, and a wooden box would eventually deteriorate. However, those cremains are often put in what's called a columbarium. How many of you are familiar with that term? Okay, not everybody. It sort of almost looks like postal boxes, but some of them are very beautiful. There are little niches in which the cremains or an urn are placed, and on the outside are the inscriptions, the dedications, the years of birth and death. So this is something to make you a little bit more familiar with this. There's still very little discussion, but for some of our congregants, this is the first decision they have to make because they've been thinking about it. So that's something for you to be aware of. Okay, I said there were 3 steps to planning a funeral. The first is the cemetery. That is usually the thing that you do the most in advance. And then there's the funeral home and the role of Temple Road Shalom. Let's start here with the cemetery. Cemeteries look different. In the upper right-hand side, you see the traditional kind of cemetery that most of us grew up with. And sometimes when people then go to the more modern-looking Jewish cemeteries, King David, for example, has flat markers in the ground. It's a jarring experience. It's not something they're used to. So you need to be aware of the fact that cemeteries look different. If you choose a military cemetery, you see yet another picture. And I know that when we went to the beaches at Normandy, we looked for the Jewish stars. There weren't a whole lot of them, but we could see them. Military cemeteries look different, too, depending upon where, when, and what the service was, but they will have a Star of David on them. So the first thing is knowing what cemeteries look like, and the next thing is deciding, and Cantor Shochet touched on this, where are you going to be buried? Most of the people in our congregation are being buried locally because they've put roots down here and they feel like it's their place. But many of us have roots elsewhere, and he mentioned family plots in New Jersey, people who always anticipated they would go back home when they died. For some of us, our kids don't live here anymore, and there's nobody who's going to be living here. So it's a decision that some couples struggle with, some individuals struggle with, and that's early on in the decision-making process. For those of you, by the way, who choose a military cemetery, you would want to go to your Veteran Affairs people. They have this down pat and can give you all the information. Purchasing a cemetery site does not mean that you own real estate. It's fairly easy to think about it that way, but what you are buying or paying for is the right to be interred in that space. You do actually get a deed if you're being buried at a place like King David. So it feels all the more like it's real estate, but legally it is not. You should know that in addition to purchasing the sites, you will almost certainly be required to buy what they call additional merchandise. One is the concrete liner, which not all, but many cemeteries require. They claim, and it makes sense, that by putting the caskets into the concrete liner, the amount of settling in the cemetery is much less, and it's much easier to do maintenance and keep it looking, especially if it's a garden-like appearance, keeping it in good shape. Jewish liners have holes in them, remember, from dust to dust, and the holes allow the casket and the deceased to go back to the earth. So, by the way, I usually suggest that if you are going to be doing a traditional burial, particularly with a cemetery that sells this additional merchandise, that you buy at least the liner from them. You can shop around and maybe get a better price, but coordinating getting the liner put in before the cemetery, all of which you want to do as quickly as possible, is very difficult. So it's much easier to, as I say, stay with the cemetery for what's going to stay at the cemetery, whether it is the liner and eventually, as I mentioned, markers as well. Yes?
Does King David require concrete?
Yes, King David requires it. Many of the cemeteries in Virginia that I've come upon require liners. You are also going to pay fees for opening and closing the grave, and those are called interment fees. Sounds a little better than grave digging. But it is definitely going to be an additional cost. And these are not cheap items. Even the fee for opening it is well over $1,000. So be aware that there are charges in addition to the site. Sometime within the year following the burial, you will be placing, or your family will be placing, a marker upon the grave. Now, if it's a traditional cemetery, it's like the one that says Edelman, and you've all seen upright markers like that. If it's more of a garden-like look, it's a flat marker. As I mentioned, again, it's probably easiest, if it's going to be at the cemetery, to buy it from the cemetery if they sell that additional merchandise, because then they will tell you that they will take responsibility if there's damage to it, or if for some reason you need to have some correction made in the future. The idea of shopping around, again, is appealing. You can save some money, but there are installation fees, and what's at the cemetery should come from the cemetery. Some cemeteries do not sell this additional merchandise, but they will tell you which vendor or vendors to go to, and they work with them. So that's a little bit easier as well. Again, you can pre-purchase this. You can even decide what you want inscribed on your marker. And all of this can be in the contract that you prepare. Or your heirs can do this after the funeral. Yes?
I have a question about, does Virginia allow ashes to be scattered?
That's a very interesting point, because there are rules about where you can and cannot scatter them. I don't know all the rules, but if that is something you want to do, you should definitely inquire more about it. We haven't had a lot of question about that the temple has dealt with. Yes?
Actually, the Shenandoah National Park does allow it. There's information on their website.
Okay.
Also the Potomac River.
Okay, that's it. Now, cremains can be put in a columbarium. They can be buried in a traditional gravesite. We have couples in where one wants a traditional burial and the other one wants cremains. You can actually layer the two, or you can have two sites. Cremains can also be scattered, or you can keep them in the closet at your house. You know, you have some options there. Yes?
If you're cremated and you have a plot, does it require a liner?
It's not, yes, it's not exactly the same liner, it's smaller, but again, they do it so that the ground doesn't sink where they've open it up and put it back. Good question. Less expensive, but still necessary. Good point. Okay, other questions about markers, liners, whatever? Many people will purchase the beginning parts and take care of that, and then say, well, the kids can use the money from the estate to pay for the marker. Other people say, I kind of want it done my way, and I'll take care of it, and it's done. So these are options that you do have. Let's talk a little bit about the local cemeteries that we use, and this is actually a very important part of this presentation. By far, the greatest number of people from Rodef Shalom who are buried locally choose King David. It is a consecrated Jewish cemetery. It's 10 minutes from here on what I think is still called Lee Highway in that part of town, Route 29. And it has been the cemetery for the Jewish community since the 1960s, and that's an important point. When King David opened, it was the only consecrated Jewish cemetery other than the small cemeteries that Washington Hebrew and Adas Israel owned for their own people. And so everybody crossed the river and came to the Potomac. And came to Virginia from Maryland, from D.C. About 20 years ago, Garden of Remembrance was founded, and I'll mention that again in a minute. And the Marylanders decided that they didn't want to cross the Potomac anymore. And so they tried to sell their sites. King David won't take them back. They couldn't sell them. And because we are such a close-by synagogue, and because we are a large synagogue, they discovered us. And when I was temple administrator, we started a program where we accept these donations. The donors get a very handsome tax deduction because these sites were bought for $600 and $700 in the 60s and 70s, and they now cost $6,000 to $11,000. And so it was, if you want to go back to the real estate idea, it was a very good investment. So they get the donation. I do all the paperwork, and we in turn market these sites only to Temple Rodef Shalom members and their immediate families. We are not in competition with King David. King David knows we do this, and they work with us on it. We market them at half price. So sites that sell now, many of them for $7,999 a piece, Rodef Shalom people get 2 sites for that same price, or they get the single site half price. That's a very big saving. Every single cent goes in to Temple Rodef Shalom's endowment, and that has been...
Bravo, I just want to say to Judy Sides, because she has single-handedly brought in almost $750,000 to our endowment over 20 years. So, bravo.
Yeah, so that's the fundraising aspect. Yes.
Yeah, just some questions on that, maybe getting to this, but talk a little about the pros and cons of that versus, buying directly from the cemetery in terms of, let's say you end up wanting to sell the plot again, you don't want to be buried there, your children don't want to be buried there. The transferability of the plot and the location, they would choose a location within the cemetery. You could talk to both.
Okay. There are times when I have as many as 30 sites. Okay. What? Only? Okay. There are times when I have almost 30 sites, and so locations, they're all over the place. There are times when it's much more restricted, so you may want to go to King David to get just the place you want. You can redonate it to Temple Rodef Shalom, and you get the tax donation that time. Selling them on the open market is very difficult. Okay? There aren't too many cons to this program. I'm going to keep moving along because time is very tight. Yes, and then we'll take questions afterward. Yeah.
I was just going to say, my husband and I just went through this a few months ago when we purchased 2 plots. And what Judy does is nothing short of miraculous.
Thank you.
So easy. She sends you everything, and she sends you to this lovely person named Mark, who drives you around. And my husband found he wanted to be in the shade and he wanted back. Then we had to sign a different document that says, you understand that if you have flowers out there, the deer will come eat them. So the extra things that you buy, you can finance them over 5
Yeah.
or 7 years or something, they charge you no interest.
Yeah. So it's a win-win.
Easy, it's a win-win-win.
So what I have done is, I still have cards from Road of Shalom because I have an extension here. If afterward you're interested and want to talk more about it, you can take one of those. Okay, 2 other choices very quickly. Columbia Gardens in Arlington near Route 50. Lovely cemetery, upright stones, very good for our interfaith families, but not a Jewishly consecrated cemetery. Garden of Remembrance in Clarksburg is that cemetery I talked about, which the Maryland folks created. It's a beautiful place. Disadvantage, it's a minimum of 45 minutes from here, and in traffic, it could be an hour and a half. So very few of our people choose it because of that. Okay, so I've told you a little bit about our good deal. Now let's very quickly go on to funeral homes, and Michael Shockett asked me to you to be aware of this. You do have choices. The large majority of people use Jefferson. They're wonderful. They know how to do a Jewish funeral. Cunningham Church and Heinz Rinaldi hold the contract for what's called the Jewish JFPA, Jewish Funeral Practices Committee. This is a committee that was formed about 30 years ago to create a Jewish package. Because before this, especially in Virginia, you had to go in and say, no, I don't want to be embalmed, I don't want flowers, I don't want viewing rooms. They know what a Jewish funeral is all about, and all 3 of these do. And there are differences in price. Michael was telling me that he just used Jefferson for his family, and I've used Jefferson as well. It is more expensive, but Cunningham Church and Heinz Rinaldi are part of this Jewish Funeral Group Practices. The contract runs out December 31st. I, for one, have not heard whether there's been any renegotiation, don't know where they stand. This is one of those examples where shopping around is interesting. There are funeral homes that are advertising even in our bulletin because they know that the Jewish population in Virginia is larger than the one in Maryland, and their business is here. So they're kind of beginning to vie for our interest. So this is, yes?
Judy, I just wanted to say that one question to ask the funeral homes is if you are going to be transporting your loved one or you'll be transported to another state, what is the process? Do they have relationships with funeral homes, where your loved one or you will be buried out of state, just to find out what that mechanism is, because that's a separate mechanism with additional costs.
And there are always additional costs. If you have military honors and you want the flag and you want the case, it costs money. So you need to be aware of, yes?
Just one thing about the Jewish Funeral Practices Committee, on which I served along with Chuck Thornton for a couple of years. I think that often these negotiations, it's not that it's a heavy, intense negotiation. I'm sure it will be, I would think, would be renewed, and I think it's an important option for folks to consider. It's a plain pine casket, it's the basic that you need, but I personally have had experience with Cunningham Church, and they were wonderful using the Jewish Funeral Practices contract.
But as I said, all 3 of these people know how to do a Jewish funeral. I'm going to continue because Stephanie is giving me the time signal. Michael went a little over. Okay. Pardon? Yes, all 3 of them will take care of tahara. Am I saying it right? The traditional washing of the body and the sitting with the body as well. So they can do the traditional kinds of things. What does a funeral home do? Very quickly, transports the body from all the places we've talked about, home or hospital, funeral home, gravesite service, etc. Casket, that's where you do have some choice, very plain pine, wanting something a little bit more fancy but still traditional. Documents. Death certificates, helping you with obituary. They let Social Security know that there's been a death, so that makes it a lot easier. Refrigeration, if needed. We don't get embalmed. In the old days, funerals took 24 hours, and poop, it was over. Can't do that today. Our kids are too far away. sometimes the body needs to be refrigerated. It's at the funeral home. Arrangements for veterans for flag ceremonies and taps, books for guests to sign in, a memorial candle. The funeral home takes care of all the administrative details. And as I said, I've listed the ones that are there. They are all very reputable, and you can feel comfortable. But there are others vying for our attention. A couple of other very practical things. Go back to that document file you're making. Any contract, any deed, any information you have that you've done, make it prominent in that file, because that's the first thing that your kids are going to need to grab, or your family need to grab when they do the funeral. Funeral wishes. Michael talked about suggestions that you might make. I'm going to tell you a story about some things that people don't want. Sometimes they don't want music, and you want to respect that. My mother, who was, for those of you who knew her, you'll shake your heads, an amazing woman, lived here for the last 10 years of her life, very specifically told me and asked me to kind of keep a note. There is a prayer called the Woman of Valor, Ashes Chaya. It's often said for older women particularly, the woman who gets up and tends the hearth and, this penultimate homemaker. My mother was a little bit of a feminist. She did not want to be remembered only that way, and she asked that they not recite this at her funeral, and although all the clergy laughed, they respected it. So tell what you don't want as well. Your Hebrew name, if you don't know it and you can't find it, you can still get one. You can go to the clergy and they will help you, right, Stephanie? And you can create a name so that you feel like you're complete in that sense. That's a little bit more on what Michael was talking about. Finally, I'm going to end as quickly as I can the role of membership in Rodef Shalom and why it's so important. As you know, I filled a number of staff positions, many of you know, at Rodef Shalom. I watched the kids leave nursery school and religious school and get bar mitzvahed and get confirmed and get married, and their parents would often come to me and say, "We don't use the temple anymore. Why should we still belong?" Well, obviously, right now in today's world, we all feel more secure knowing that we're supporting an important Jewish institution in the community, period. However, my colleagues used to say, tell them it's like insurance. You pay a lot of premiums and you hope you don't have to use it. But when you need it, it's there. And you can look at that, Rodef Shalom, for that purpose. This place is amazing, and I can say it as a layperson. Our clergy is superb. If you have thoughts or issues about someone in your family and you think that death is closer than not, talk to them. They will be helpful while that person is alive and as helpful as you can imagine when the death occurs. The clergy, while the people who actually conduct the funeral will ask for lots of information from you, like who do you want to speak, and if you know ahead of time, you can put it in the file, and they will also want to know plans, and this is something you should speak with your kids about. Where do you want donations made? What kind of mourner's meal do you want? And that's a practical thing that you may not want to bother the clergy with, but you can call Stephanie or you can call me, and we have suggestions. So there are many kinds of ways in which Rodef Shalom can help you, and it goes beyond the funeral. We have grief groups. We have support groups. We have counseling. We have access to counseling outside of the congregation. And Rodef Shalom is such an important place to come back to. I find that many people who were not active previously find this the easiest and first place to emerge from a period of mourning. And I think of a few people in particular who really found new meaning to being part of the Jewish community after a loss and after they had experienced how wonderful our clergy and our entire community can be. So that's why you belong to Rodef Shalom, amongst many, many other reasons. I will also say that I am here. You can leave a message for me on this extension. I'm in the directory. You can call me at home. If you have a question and you say, I don't really feel like that's something to bother the clergy with, bother me, bother Stephanie, but get your questions answered. And I'm going to run because I know that the one other thing is, that's, if you look at this presentation again, that's how to find me. Okay.
Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome.
She is a one-woman wonder.
Thank you. So while we're getting situated, I just figured we're talking about death, and Hannah's heard this already. My 3.5-year-old grandson is very interested in what happens when people die, and he knows that neither one of his 2 grandfathers is living, and also very important to the story, he lives in Brooklyn. So he asked his mom, Mommy, what happens, where do people go when they die? And she said, well, we really don't know. And he said, maybe Queens. So there are a lot of Jewish cemeteries in Queens, so I think he was onto something.
This is the worksheet and some of the readings. Okay, great.
Okay.
We're going to go through this very
Lickety-split. Okay. So, Hannah, it's great to be doing this with you, especially with your special headband that you have on.
Yes, I just thought
All right.
we could add a little humor.
Great. So I'm going to start by
I'll put these on this front seat here.
I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the history of ethical wills in Judaism, which some of you may know, and what are ethical wills. Stephanie's put a couple of books up here.
No, I have.
Oh, you have. Hannah did.
These, by
Okay.
the way, are in our library. We have a great library, as you know. So
Yes.
I use these as resources. It's in the 396. But anyway, you can find them there.
You even gave them the Dewey Decimal? Look at the,
Yes.
wow, this is a thorough group. Okay. So an ethical will is a letter or something we write to our loved ones that convey our hopes for their future and that explains our moral and spiritual values. And when I thought about this when Hannah and I first did this presentation, I thought, well, my kids know what's important to me in that way, and hopefully they do through the way that they've seen us live our lives. But I think there's something valuable about actually putting this in writing. This is a long-standing Jewish tradition of which many of us are not aware. Much as a legal will enables us to hand out our assets and our possessions to our heirs, an ethical will gives us a chance to share our wisdom, lessons we've learned over a lifetime, where we found meaning in our lives, and what we might want for our loved ones going forward. So traditionally, Jewish ethical wills contain some of the things we've been talking about today, including burial instructions, debts and obligations, requests that family members carry on certain religious traditions, and blessings over the family. Modern ethical wills are less about accounting and instruction and more about imparting our wisdom and wishes, or simply a life review. They can be in the form of a letter addressed to one's children. We're going to take a look at an example of one of those, but they can take many forms. There's no template, there's no halakha, there's no Jewish law about the form that they must follow. Jewish ethical wills often focus on the role of Jewish religion, identity, and community in our lives. There is this tradition, as I mentioned, of imparting such advice that's rooted in our biblical texts. And what is interesting about these is that often they are in the form of a poem. You'll see that in the Torah. Not the kind of poem we think of that rhymes, but it's clear that it's not narrative text. So the most famous example of this in the Torah is that on his deathbed, Jacob makes predictions about and cautions each of his sons and Joseph's sons, his grandchildren, Manasseh and Ephraim. And when Moses understands and accepts that he's not going to enter the promised land, he speaks of the experiences that he shared with the Israelites and his stern corrections and warnings about their future. The Talmud contains references to verbal ethical wills or deathbed instructions, primarily left by sages and scholars, because the Talmud is less concerned about the rest of us and more, it's through the written about and through the eyes of the rabbis. So as Rabbi Eliezer, a very famous scholar in the Talmud, lay dying, he criticized his students for not taking advantage of the opportunities that they had to learn from him. A little bit of a narcissist, I guess. His aim was to move his students to learn from his teachings even after his death. In the Middle Ages, Jewish ethical wills were shared privately among families, One of the most famous was written by a Spanish Jewish physician and scholar, Judah ibn Tibbon, to his son Samuel when he died in France in the 12th century. It ran over 50 pages long, no pressure, and covered a wide range of topics from the importance of books. So he was the one who wrote the familiar line, "Let books be your companions, let bookcases and shelves be your pleasure grounds and gardens." So beautiful. However, there was a harsh rebuke to his son as well, so I don't advise putting harsh rebukes in. And the one I'd like for us to take a look at, you have on the second, you have this little handout that says, and Hannah, did you want to add anything before we do that? You do.
As you listen to these, there are a few framing questions to ask yourself, okay? Like, who are we? And who will we be in the memories of those who come after us, whether children or other members of the family, or perhaps, should you be so lucky as to have been a scholar that had students who studied with you. So who are we and who will we be in the memories of those people? And what are the values that gave and give meaning to our lives? And how can we convey those values to the next generation, to these people that we want to share this with? So some examples, I think this is a beautiful one that Stephanie selected, an example of a ethical will.
And there's some others on the back of that page as well.
Yes, so this is the memoirs of Glückel of Hameln.
Yes, and actually, you can buy this book and read it, the whole book. It's lovely. So you see a little information about her here. She was born we think in 1646, died in 1724. She was a Jewish businesswoman and diarist, and she didn't just become a Jewish businesswoman. She became a Jewish businesswoman when her husband died. And he had all of these business dealings, and so she was the one that had to manage them. The memoir is written in Yiddish, but it's been translated into English. And this was originally intended, the entire memoir, to be an ethical will for her children. And it's the only known pre-modern Yiddish memoir written by a woman. So, Hannah, how do you think we should do this?
Well, shall we just take up? We were going to have people read some of it aloud. I don't know how our time is because we've lost some time.
Yeah.
Why don't we? Yes, if somebody would like to read the second paragraph and then go around and read, and if you're able.
Yeah. Starting with this, dear children. That's where. Read it on. Yeah, sure.
You can.
That's
we just
absolutely
want to
fine.
inform
We thought there would be something
later.
meaningful about hearing the words together, but if you all would rather read it by yourselves, that's perfectly fine.
All right. Well, I am going to read one.
Okay.
I'm going to read the one from Jenny Stein, Berman. It said, "To all my children, this is your mother's last wish. After I am gone, you should always be together and well and happy. And of what is left in money, I want you to share and share alike. Florence, Alvin, Julius, Lester, if it is only $1, you should each get a fourth of it. That is my last wish. And if I go before Sam was her brother, you should all see to it that he has a place to sleep with something to eat at all times, please. Then I can rest in peace. That is my last wish, that you all be well and happy, and I give you my blessings and love, Mother." And so this is like the shortest possible thing. But in it, she has conveyed not only what she hopes for them, but the fact that taking care of this brother who was not able to take care of himself was something that had been so important to her. So she's conveyed a lot to her children in this. Happy, share, and take care of those in need. So anyway, I did want to share that.
Hannah, I'm really glad that Hannah did read this particular one because it brings up something else. Many of us, I'm sure, in this room are perhaps giving financial assistance to family members and perhaps others. And I know in my case, I've mentioned to my adult children, I'm helping so-and-so. But I have not written anything down about this, so how would they know specifically? So these are not things that are in my will, but things that I'm doing sort of on the ground in real time to help individuals in my family. So that is something that I think would be important to include in an ethical will, and perhaps to think about expanding it to, if there's somebody else in the family who's in need of help, my wish is that you help them, but this is what I am doing at this particular time, and I wish that it be continued. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Hannah?
No, I think we can go right to we have created a kind of a planning grid, a way of sort of helping you to, when you sit down, to begin to build your ethical will. Obviously, these prompts, some will reach out to you, and others are like, well, I'm moving on to the next one. But we feel that it gives you the sort of pieces you're going to need to think about. And I'll start just with like the opening. Part of what you have to decide is, who are you writing this for? And for what purpose? I mean, we can say what we think our purpose is, but you yourself individually need to decide who you're writing it to, and in an order, we've written this, I write this to you, my blank, and in order to blank. So these are ways for you to start to frame it when you sit down to think about writing an ethical will. And our family, so you may want to talk, some people are thinking, well, this is for the next generation, but actually the generation you lived with and the generation above you, before you, are probably in your minds about what you think and what you feel came from that interaction as much as anything. So in describing, if this is important to you, my parents, my siblings, the people who came before me, and how those people and the events you shared with those people shaped your life. This is something some of us don't get around to telling the next generation. And these are actually the stories they most want to hear, especially if they were so important to you, not just the funny joke that someone told, but the moment that sticks in your mind and was transformative. I'll let you go on to the next one about the...
Yeah, and I just wanted to also say something about family. Many times our children are curious, and we may or may not know where their ancestors came from. And I know I'm continuously finding out things about my family. On a recent visit back to Minnesota, I found out that I had a cousin who wrote a book about an experience that her father had. Her father was my father's first cousin, but much older, so I never knew them. And it's called Marvin, something in the Great North Woods. It's a children's book. So what is the story? That in Duluth, Minnesota, in the flu pandemic in 1918, right, Marvin's parents sent him north to be with lumberjacks to hopefully shield him from the flu epidemic at age 10. So there's a beautiful children's book that Catherine Lasky is her name, my cousin, wrote. I had no idea about this. There may be stories like this in your own family that then I was able to purchase for my grandchildren, and the oldest understands. I said, this is your cousin at age 10. He went to live with lumberjacks for the winter. So, we don't all have cousins like Marvin, but, there's stories like that maybe we don't know, or we think that we should transmit. So I think that those are very important. In terms of religious observances and insights, Jewish rituals that have been of meaning to you, and to your family, perhaps an anecdote about how your grandparents celebrated Passover. In my case, my grandfather could never finish the Seder because my grandmother was impatient to get the meal out. So something like that's a living memory of your family. And if there are teachings from Jewish tradition that are meaningful to you, to include those. And I think Cantor Shockett mentioned that as part of thinking about funeral preparation as well.
I'm thinking, for instance, like for my husband, the children, they used to mock him, but now they don't mock it, because his favorite prayer is the Shehechianu, and he will say it like they come in the door or anything like that, and they say, oh no, he's doing the Shehechianu again. But now I think they've come to appreciate that. But that is something that for him is a key to how he sees these everyday things that to him are transformative, and so he says the Shehechianu.
Personal history, people who've influenced your life. They may or may not know your family of those people. Events that have shaped your life. Hopefully your children and your grandchildren know, but they may not.
Sometimes we think we're going to tell them someday. Well, that someday has probably come.
Right. And then ethical ideas and practices that are important to you, and also anecdotes here. I learned only after my grandmother died that she would take bags of groceries to a family in the town in Minnesota where they lived who she knew was in need. And she would leave the bags of groceries outside their door. And how did I find this out? At her funeral. The family came up to me and my mother and my aunt and my sister and said, this is what she did. So, you know, you could say they're Maimonides principles, you know, you shouldn't, you know, but I wish I'd known that about her. She wasn't your typical warm, fuzzy, you know, bubby. So that was interesting for me to know, but also very important that this is what you do. You know, this is how you help people. This is how you take care of people. So if you have anecdotes in your family that fit into this, I think this would be an important place to put those.
And I do think that one of the things, everyone here is philanthropic. And there may be organizations or an organization or several that you give to over the long haul that matter to you. Some maybe you've been doing since you were in your 20s. And your children probably don't know. And then there's whatever it might be, an institution. I mean, there's Temple Rodef Shalom, but there's also other things that really, year in and year out, have mattered to you, and you've shown it by your philanthropy. Your children should know that about you. This has been, you know, or maybe for some of you it is your alma mater, but this has been so important to me. The education I got, the comfort and sympathy I got, whatever it is, they should know that about you and not be so surprised that you turn out to have been a giver of gifts.
Right.
So.
And then finally, the wishes that you have. And I would advise not going along with the, you know, you should have done this or you should have done that.
That's why the Jacob stuff is very distressing. You know,
yes, it is
you're
very
going to have a difficult life, and you're, no.
Yes. And then, you know, perhaps a closing blessing for them. You know, Hannah, one thing I did leave out in terms of the history, because I knew we were pressed for time, is to talk a little bit about ethical wills in the Holocaust, and many of you may already know this. There is one written by Zipporah Berman, who was a member of the Jewish underground in the Białystok ghetto in Poland. She left an ethical will to future generations of Jews before she died in 1943. And her notes for this, which were discovered after the Second World War, included a call to action for vengeance with no mercy and with no sentimentality. Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum and Memorial in Israel, has a number of ethical wills that were hastily written by Jews before they were killed by the Nazis. One ethical will thanks the writer's parents, asks for a proper Jewish burial, probably that didn't happen, and expresses an unending love for God. And I'm guessing some of those may be digitized if you went on to Yad Vashem. And finally, and I know Hannah, and was anyone here on the Eastern European trip, the recent one? So I know that you went to the Jewish archives, historical archives in Warsaw, as I had the privilege of doing last summer, guiding another trip, to see documents from what's called the Oneg Shabbat Archive. If you don't know about it, it's fascinating. This was an archive that was organized by Emanuel Ringelblum, who was, from what they told us at the archives, an average historian, but brilliant at organizing people. And what he did was he wanted to put together a repository of life in the Warsaw Ghetto, everything from theater tickets to bubblegum wrappers to interviews. So these documents were stuffed into metal milk cans and boxes prior to the liquidation of the ghetto. They were buried in 3 different parts. 2 of the 3 have been found, were found after the war. 300,000 documents are in the custody of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. And I wanted to share a little snippet of the ethical will of David Gruber, who was 19 at the time. He said, "I would love to see the moment in which the great treasure will be dug up and scream the truth at the world. May the treasure fall into good hands. May it last into better times. May it alarm and alert the world to what happened in the 20th century. May history be our witness." So they knew this specifically, that they were leaving this entire record in a way as an ethical will, because it was about life. It was about living life in these terrible conditions. And several of them, including David Gruber, wrote these sort of final ethical wills.
So I think one of the questions that often comes up is like, when might you share such an ethical will? Obviously, there are 2 times you could share an ethical will, one before you're gone and one after you're gone. And I mean, this is a very personal decision, and I suppose it also depends on what's in your ethical will. But people do it either way, and it might be actually an opportunity for sitting down for a conversation with family at some point when you have finished this document. And of course, the other option is to leave it for them to read later on. I don't know if you have some thoughts about that.
I think it depends on your family. I think in some families, some of our children will be very glad that we're all doing this, and some maybe don't even want to talk about it. They just want to know what drawer the document is in. So I think it really depends on the family. And I would also encourage you, Judy was talking about the benefits of synagogue membership, and Han and I went out briefly, so you may have said this. At Rodef Shalom and other synagogues, we get calls all the time for people who are not members who are looking for a rabbi or cantor to officiate at their funeral. And sadly, we have to tell them that, we can't. We don't have the capacity to do that. So, and this is something I'm seeing more and more, as Judy was talking about, with a lot of people wondering what is the purpose of affiliation. I think it's important, if you hear people having these kinds of discussions, there are rabbis in the community that, if they are available, would be willing to officiate, but enable. But that is not always the case. So, wanted to mention that as well.
Do you want to give a blessing, or do you have
something I wanted to say in closing, that we don't have to wait until the end of our lives to do this. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that just in a couple of weeks, we're going to be reading the Torah portion that I referenced before, Parshat Vayechi. We're going to be reading it the very last Shabbat of this year, actually, and even though what Jacob said, as Hannah pointed out, in many ways was harsh, I think it's important that we consider leaving these kinds of ethical teachings to our children, and how fitting that this is happening, right before the end of the year. So we don't have to wait till the end of our lives to share these important values that we have with our children. This is a really good time as we approach a new year. We think about New Year's resolutions, right? How many of us make them either in the fall, we get to do it twice, right? Or at the secular New Year. It's a time to reflect on the values and Jewish teachings that are central to our lives. And taking the time to write an ethical will is not only important for us, for our children, but also gives us an opportunity perhaps to redirect some of or tweak our priorities that we've set for ourselves.
I do think it's so important. I feel so strongly that, I felt this, thinking of Jacob several times has some issues with sharing blessings and being kind. So there should be enough blessings to go around. And we all know that many of us have children and nephews and nieces and grandchildren. They're not all the same. They don't interact with us always in the same way. But there should be blessings for everybody. And I don't see an ethical will as at any moment something in which you are chastising someone. This should be moving by love or simply sharing. Teaching, sharing, whatever it is, but not chastising, really.
So we have just a couple of minutes left. We're going to stop at 12 and wondered if anybody had any comments or any questions. That's a great question. I do not know the answer to that. Maybe somebody does. Oh, I'm sorry. Do other religious faith communities have the tradition of an ethical will? so I don't know the answer.
I think
To
Modern
Judy?
Life
I
has
believe
it.
they do because I have a friend who's a Presbyterian minister and he has talked about
Nice.
using this kind
Okay,
of messaging.
wonderful. Great question. Yeah, Greg?
In addition to contacting funeral homes, is there a written document or a place to look for Jewish burial practices?
Do we have something, Rabbi Schwartzman, do we have something on the website, or maybe Judy knows about Jewish burial practices?
Well, I know what I teach the sixth graders. But I
Amy,
don't know that we
come on
have a
up.
specific document.
Yeah.
Rabbi Schwartzman, would you like?
I would just share that, thanks to Otto having to walk in the room.
Hello,
We do
Otto.
have a document that we share with people online, a document that we can send you via email that is sort of a checklist, and it in some ways reflects what are some of the values that
Stephanie
relate
has
to
access.
burial, but
Mm-hmm.
also in any conversation that you might want to have with, whether it's Stephanie or any member of the clergy, we can help you navigate what your personal value and principles that are important to you in burial with things that we can support and helping you to know where those things, where those resources are found. So, to your question, Greg, yes, or, you know.
Yeah.
Sort of, yes.
Greg, also, I think if they still have their website, the Jewish Funeral Practices Committee probably has some information on their website. Yeah, that would be traditional. Yeah, Lynn?
This might be more of a Toastson question, but what does it mean Jewishly to bless?
Yeah, that's a big.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
I think that might be a good adult education.
Yes, I think so too. But, I would just say that blessings in Judaism are not limited in terms of their being given by our religious leaders. We bless our children. We have the tradition of blessing our children every Shabbat. So you don't have to have religious authority, whatever that is, in Judaism these days to bless. Yeah.
Yeah, question, it was traditionally understood that Jews don't do cremation. I'm just curious about this sort of openness to cremation and what's sort of, what's evolved on that and where the reform.
Sure. Well, you could go to URJ's website and read more about that, but I think, as Judy mentioned, it's becoming more common. We see that in the Reformed Jewish community more often. And there may be some response on that, too, as well. Do you know, Rabbi Schwartzman, if
I
there?
don't know, but we accept it as an appropriate practice, and I would say, I think you could corroborate this, Rabbi Bernstein, that about a third, I would say, of the
It's
deaths
pretty high.
which we are working in the congregation choose cremation.
Yep. So, Stephanie, do you need some time?
Yeah,
Stephanie
we're
needs some time.
going to
see
step,
the.
so your last.
One thing
Lisa.
that's not to mention is organ donation.
This is something that is supported by, I think, Jews across the board, even within the Orthodox world. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining, especially all of our speakers, Judy, Rabbi Bernstein, Hannah, and Cantor Shockett. So I know that there was a lot to take in today, and there are a lot of assignments you might be thinking about doing now. What I urge you to do is take the time and be mindful of not only the ethical will, but some of the other documents in your wishes. Again, this is a stage of life. If we honor this as a stage of life, we know this is all going to happen to us. So how do we make a good death? Just as we worked hard to make a good life, how do we do this and do it mindfully? So take the time to look through all of the documents, and on the ethical will, on creating an ethical will, and some of these questions, what I'd like to think about is these are branching points, and you might not want to address every one of these questions, you might, but go with the ones that speak to you and start with that. If you look at this and you think, oh, I have to answer every one of these questions, you might get easily overwhelmed. So take a look at them and say, okay, what do I want to write about? What can I carve time for? And enjoy the process. It doesn't have to be I've got to get this done, and I need to sit down and accomplish and knock it all out in an hour, 2 hours, an afternoon. Take a look at the questions and take some time to set aside and think, what do I want to write about, and how can I enjoy this process? There are great questions in here, and on page 2 of the ethical will, what are 3 core values in my life? Choices. What gives my life meanings? In such a busy world, sometimes we forget to have these conversations with our loved ones or our children. And so take the time and see what comes to you and write them down. And as Rabbi Bernstein and Hannah said, you can share them now, in lovely conversation, or you can leave them for when you're gone. But do take the time to write them down. I'll tell you quickly that I attempted one of these questions and I wrote them, I worked on it. I did it in 2 pages, just a quick 2-page, to get my values down and some of the stories. And I shared them with my kids and they said, well, I had no idea you ever thought that. And why would I have wanted to wait? Hopefully 50 more years, 40 more years before they had to read these. So take the time and like I said, enjoy the process. This is a stage and we want the stage to be as beautiful and as intentional as the lives that we choose to live now. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you found it useful. I'm sure you did. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I passed around Judy's card. You can also reach out. She has so much information on funeral practices. So have a wonderful afternoon and start writing.